Greetings, travelers.
Greetings, travelers.
Oh man, we are plowing through here, and this year is just flying by. Oh my gosh, it's April. It's
It's
crazy,
April, right? Is it
and
is it
and
Alien April or
I think Alien April works for me. Even though we're going to talk all our usual stuff, but we've got some Alien episodes lined up. So,
well, we know who will be really happy about that.
oh, I'm sure we've already got emails lined up for days from our estranged ex.
Yes.
That's how I've been referring to him. We have some important breaking news.
Breaking news.
Wow. I love that music. It's been forever. So, this goes back to when we were researching Freaky Florida after we had done Eerie, Florida. People were telling me about this amazing cemetery that was just this kind of quiet, off the side road cemetery that was near the Florida National Cemetery, and it was called Cow Prairie Cemetery, Wild Cow Prairie Cemetery.
Oh, I remember you talking about this. This was one of the ones that wasn't this one of the ones that the highway went over part of it like they
Yeah.
discovered?
Yep,
Yeah.
and the villages wanted to tear it down. They wanted to buy the land and tear it down and put a gas station. Even though there's Revolutionary War people, Civil War people buried there, they wanted to just move it to the National Cemetery, which isn't too far away. But we always knew it had a bit more history to it. We got ground penetrating radar there and all that. And we found way more graves than people thought. There were some outside the fence area. And then we found Native American graves there where they were seated graves and such. And now we realize that when they built the highway, they built right over Indian burial ground, didn't tell anybody. They just did it.
Of course they did.
But anyway, we were able to get this on the National Registry of Historic Places, so it was unable to be bought by the villages. And now it is being, investigated, restored, documented, all that. But it got in the news on March 29th. A man and a woman ran afoul of the law when they were caught having sex on a grave in a local cemetery, which is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And the way I read that headline was, I was like, of them having sex being listed on the National Register of Historic Places?
Oh, punctuation, as our dear friend J.M. Paquette would say, punctuation is key.
Yeah, they were on top of unknown grave 43. Troopers drove by, observed a white male and female at the rear of the cemetery, engaged in sexual activity, and they went back to their vehicle for clothes. Imagine that they had pills containing oxycodone and other things on them. So, wow.
Well, I am not going to lie. As teenagers, I don't know how old was this couple? Did they say their ages?
They're in their 40s, 46.
Okay, so
for
that's a
her,
little
and
different.
I don't know the guy.
I was going to say, as a teenager, you kind of got into that whole like, hey, let's go be naughty in a graveyard. Not everybody, mind you, but some of us weirdos were into that. And needless to say, though, they got caught and they failed. They failed completely. So,
one of my favorite jokes ever was this young woman goes to her doctor and she says, Doctor, I've got all this terrible back pain. And he's like, what do you think it came from? She's like, well, my husband and I like to experiment sexually, and we tried a few new places. And the doctor's like, He's like, well, you're going to have to disrobe so I can check your back. And so she takes her back, and he goes, so that's really your only problem is the back pain? And she goes, yeah, why? And he says, well, either you guys had sex in a graveyard or you died in 1867 because that's stamped back here.
Oh, I love it. That's
a classic. All right. So anyway, enough of this silliness. So let's talk about one of the most famous cryptids in the world, but I don't think he gets nearly enough love. I mean, well, maybe he does, because his journey is wild. And
who are we talking about?
Well, let me get in the Wayback Machine here.
Well, I have snacks, so that works out well.
Got our snacks. We're going to travel back. This is nearly 35 years ago. And they discovered this place in West Virginia called Hellhole Cave.
Oh.
So that'll tell you everything you need to know about this, right? And they dig deep. So this is June 23rd, 1992.
Okay.
And they were in this cave, and they discovered, and it's in Pendleton County, West Virginia, and Dr. Ron Dillon discovered this unique creature living in this cave in the Allegheny Mountains. So they explore down here, and about 2 miles underground, they discover a strange entity.
Okay, so this is giving me Mushroom Mine vibes, like all over the place.
Same type area, but this is a natural cave system. It's still part of technically the Mammoth Cave system. We're not sure because we don't know where they all connect and all that. We're still mapping all that to this day, but this is 2 miles down. This is coal mine territory, so there's probably some coal mines linking up to natural caverns and stuff. And this creature living down there is a humanoid.
Okay.
It has huge eyes. It has very large ears and very, very sharp teeth. And they trying to figure it out what it could be.
Okay.
And when they discovered it, they just realized it's some sort of deformity.
Oh.
That possibly related to some of the other underground creatures that have been spotted over the mountains of Appalachia. We talked about them in Eerie, Appalachia, the bogeymen, right? Of the one cave system that the Rose Run mine exploded into. This is very similar, a little more unique, has big eyes that really make it stand out. Those ones were described as more like frogmen, toadmen, very similar to Loveland Frogman type thing. But this one is very tricky and unpredictable, according to the scientists. They actually capture it, and they start studying it for extended periods of time, but it keeps escaping. It's wily, it's smart, and quickly starts blowing up in the headlines. And this one actually made national headlines. Now, we know most of our cryptid stories just get shuffled off, never seen again. But this one, probably the most famous headline 30 years ago, is giant eyes see in the dark. His ears are better than radar, say scientists. Bat child found in cave.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay, bat child.
Yep, about 2 foot tall creature. So becomes famous after that headline, starts spreading further than any other headline at that time, right? It's all over. It goes viral before viral was a thing.
Didn't they have a picture of this creature?
They have a picture on the cover of the newspaper headlines for it. And the scientists and reporters are quickly very skittish, very elusive, frequently on the run, often disappearing for extended periods of time. But then he would come back and do more outrageous headlines. At one point, he managed to steal a vehicle and drove it at high speed and led pursuers on a multi-state run with law enforcement in pursuit.
Wow.
Yes. And then as it got a little even more, he was captured by the FBI. He was stranded on a rooftop by the Mississippi flood. And that was how these agents ended his 27 state ride run away from the police and stuff. So now Dr. Dillon, one of the foremost experts on him, describes him as a human bat hybrid creature. His father was likely a bat or a creature heavily dominated by the bat genomes. And his mother was named Susan Boy. Now, she was a human, and they've traced her ancestry to passengers on the Mayflower. So they've done a lot of study on this creature.
Wow. I want to know how they found out who its mother and father were.
That was through genetic testing. And they were able to basically 23andMe him before 23andMe was a thing. And now that 23andMe is not going to be a thing anymore, remember, all of you who have 23andMe data, get out there and have your data deleted because it's going to be sold in their bankruptcy. Anyway, this creature's life became a whirlwind, right? And the newspapers had a tough time just keeping up with him. In the years since his discovery, he was frequently cited with nearly every United States president. He was cited with Nelson Mandela.
Oh, wow.
With our Mandela, before the Mandela effect was a thing.
I think he's the reason the Mandela effect is a thing.
He could definitely be associated with it. He was also seen with Frank Sinatra.
Wow.
Shortly before his passing.
Oh, blue eyes.
And then he was even supposedly seen with Elvis.
Well, that makes sense. I mean,
that's probably
maybe a little exaggerated.
I assume it might have been. But he was a known pagan creature. He worshipped some strange stone gods. They tried to study him. They were trying to communicate with him. Apparently he was meeting presidents, so there has to be some more of this. And, well, I think we just have to say this guy was a superstar, right?
Yeah.
He's
technically more famous than Bigfoot.
Yeah, he's definitely had more headlines than Bigfoot,
yeah.
or at least gives him a run for his money. But it also helps that women love him, right? He's like known to be more than just a cryptid. Like, we know he drives vehicles. We know he communicates. We know he's met with political powerhouses. There's rumors that he had dated some of Hollywood's most influential superstars. There's rumors that he dated Farrah Fawcett, Jennifer Lopez, Jean Kirkpatrick, Cher, Kim Kardashian, and now there are recent rumors that he's dated Taylor Swift.
Wow.
Yeah, never settled down. Okay.
Well,
but we do know he has no known offspring. So I don't think he can properly produce offspring of his own.
So this is Bat Boy. Is he now referred to as Batman, or has he just not aged and not grown at all?
Well, because his mother was Susan Boy, that's his last name, is Boy. So that is why he is.
Oh, now I get it. Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, that's what they started calling him. It's very similar to Hellboy, but Bat Boy. And now he is a reluctant cultural icon right now. And he is a national treasure of the United States, right? He loves hiding in plain sight. He has been on numerous TV shows and films. He's been on The Simpsons, American Dad, Gravity Falls. He's in their opening credits. He's even been on The Boys. And then when he's not evading the paparazzi and law enforcement or government scientists, we've been there. We know this, right? We know how to do this. He also enjoys supporting his fans. He appears in pop culture outlets. In 2022, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth.
Wow.
Shortly after being blessed by Pope Francis. And he sought out the presidential nomination in 2020. And sadly, as an independent, he didn't even get to be part of the debates or anything. I love that he is right-wing and left-wing.
Oh.
Because of his bat appearance, right? I love that. That was when he converted to religion. That was when Pope Francis blessed him. Now, psychics say he didn't run in 2024, but he may be running in 2028, and psychics say that may be his year.
That kind of makes sense.
Right. I would think so, right?
Yeah.
So Bat Boy, that's who we've discussed. You guys read the title of this, right? You know who we're talking about. And he's just, he's amazing. We have so many headlines of him from various things. I love that he at one point dated Hillary Clinton and had a secret rendezvous with them. They did his genealogy, and it dates back to the 17th century. And they even say that there might have been a human bat hybrid colony that existed over there.
Oh,
and
wow.
Now he did have a speaking part in American Dad as a cartoon, and but he's had this amazing life, and he even had a musical that made it to off Broadway just before the pandemic. So Bat Boy the musical is amazing, and highly recommend if you can find it. It's incredible. But yeah, happy April Fools, everybody.
I was like having a hard time giving a straight face. I'm like,
I know.
Oh my gosh, Bat Boy. But we grew up with Bat Boy being, in the newsstands and on the cover, and they had what he looked like. And that was before AI existed.
Oh, I know. It's incredible that these stories, if you look at Bat Boy's headlines for 30 years, they are just incredible. And the fact that he's still around, Weekly World News is now digital. And we're going to get into Weekly World News after the break. But one of his most recent headlines is Bat Boy's band is on the run, again pursued by the FBI. And the lights dim in the Flora Man's cave in Daytona, Florida. And I love that.
Is that where Bat Boys All Stars? Daytona, Florida?
Yep. Bat Boys All Stars was the band.
Mark, one of the things I want to talk about is like this has been a phenomenon. He gets dragged out all the time, and we don't see this with a lot of the, headlines and stuff like that. But, people even have reported kind of seeing something like Bat Boy because it's what a lot of people say Mothman kind of looks like.
Well, and then we mentioned in that whole, Huntington Bogeyman. And that is a real story, a real encounter with strange things living underground. And it kind of fits in with Hopkinsville goblins a little bit. It kind of fits in with some of these other creatures that we've seen and people have seen. So yeah, it captured the imagination. One of the cool things about him, I think, is that they didn't just do a headline every week, right? We'll get in, like I said, the history of Weekly World News in a bit, but they started with this real simple thing as they were writing about another obscure cryptid, Champ, right?
Oh.
And they came up with this idea of a storyline for him where he went to do a grudge match with the Loch Ness Monster. And so they tracked him over several issues of Weekly World News. And they had him sailing out into the Atlantic. They had sightings of him in the Atlantic. They had sightings of him in England. They finally had, Greenland, England, finally sightings of him in Loch Ness. And it wasn't that he was going to fight the Loch Ness Monster. He was going to mate with the Loch Ness Monster. It was a love story.
Well, I mean, it's kind of sweet if you think about it.
Exactly. If I was a cryptid, you got to travel far distances to get busy. Yes. Yeah. But Bat Boy, I mean, they started coming up with headlines. One of my favorites, I almost included it in our little fake diatribe there, was he after 9/11, he decided to become patriotic and join the military.
Oh.
And he started excelling in the military so that they were going to clone him and make them as super troops. He is actually the one who supposedly caught Saddam Hussein.
Oh.
He was the leader of SEAL Team 6 at that point.
By the way, we all know, even joking aside, that team of people did amazing. And so
they're amazing. And Bat Boy they didn't need Bat Boy's DNA for that.
Yeah.
But that is because the Weekly World News, they were an amazing story, and I can't wait to get to that. So we're going to take an early break so that we can get right into the meat of this.
Destiny Beard, the lyrical soprano who will haunt your dreams. With her alluring melodies and intricate harmonies, this dark siren of wistful song shall capture your soul and lead you into the night. Check out Destiny's new single, The Haunting Is Over, with international musicians Sam Haines and Gary Bennett, as well as her other musical works at destinybeard.com.
Okay, we're back from an early break, Mark.
I've got to go into the story of the Weekly World News, right?
You do, because we're unfortunately surrounded with quite a bit of fake news these days, but back then, that was the fake news.
That was the start of it all, basically. I like somebody's quote about it was the most creative newspaper in American history. I think that is the best thing. One person called it the Beatles of fake journalism. So that's the level. My favorite quote ever was from one of my all-time heroes, and that is Dave Barry, a fellow Florida author. And he quote, "The tabloid that screamed in joyous horror for 28 years.
So, so true. So
all
true.
Right. So the story,
Wayback Machine again, I know. Yep. Let's go.
Yep. So we're going to go back to the 80s. Yay. So get your leggings on, and we'll load up with neon. But if you remember the 80s, really, it wasn't any of that. We were all still living in paneled homes with stuff left over from the 70s, right?
Yeah, it was very beige until neon came into play, but yes.
Right. So the story goes that this guy, he bought, his name was Generoso Pope Jr.
Wow.
Basically the father of the supermarket tabloid. So in the 70s and 80s, we would go with our parents to the grocery store, and amongst the aisles of boring stuff, you might find some knockoff G.I. Joes. You might find some knockoff crazy toys. And you were always scanning for just something to keep you occupied. And then you would see these strange headlines on newspapers. Now, Generoso Pope, he had a $25,000 down payment, right? And he purchased the New York Evening Inquirer. And this was a newspaper that had been around for some time, and it primarily reported on the goings-on of the well-to-do in New York, which was a lot of celebrities, as it was. And he got that. Now, there's a fun story that $25,000, he probably borrowed it from the mob.
Yeah.
So we don't know 100%, but it wound up paying off for him. He did this in 1952. Now, the New York Evening Inquirer becomes, after he purchases it, he brands it as the National Enquirer so that he can sell it everywhere.
Yes.
All right. And its specialty was lurid headlines. They would go around the world and get the craziest stories they could find, and then they would blow them up to make exciting headlines. One of the most famous was Starving Mom Eats Own Child, right? And that was a true story that they spiced up. It was very similar to what we used to do for Hellview Cemetery for my haunted house. I would take these true legends and spice them up a little bit. But then they started trying to get into grocery stores. So the grocery store said, you have to tone that down. We can't have stuff like that. So they started really focusing on celebrity gossip and stuff like that. Now, their rival was the Star. And Weird Al did a fun song about the Midnight Star, but that was more his takeoff on the National Enquirer and all that.
Yeah.
But the Star decides to go color. And so the National Enquirer, to compete, had to upgrade their facilities and create their color. But they had all that leftover stuff. And Generoso, he's like, I'm not just going to let this sit idle. And so he comes up with the Weekly World News. And it starts just like the others. It's just tame news of celebrities getting married, news of celebrities getting divorced, what's playing in theaters, just your average, what they call tabloids. They were just newspapers. And then they decided somewhere in there, they had to just, they were realizing the spooky was selling, and they had to separate themselves from the others. One of the big ones was they started trying back to those old crazy headlines. So, boy trapped in old fridge eats own foot to stay alive. Again, kind of a true story. And again, just blown up to make it exciting. And Pope was just really excited about some of these headlines. And he started really cracking on this team, saying, get me more like that. And people started saying, oh, this is, again, fake news. And they'd be like, no, this is a real story. We've run with it. And he started getting a little, okay, now we need to make some money, right?
Yeah.
And that's when the rails come off. He starts allowing things to start coming out. Now, basically, they change managing editors. The guy named Eddie Kluntz comes in, and they say was the genius that saved Weekly World News. They were about to go out of business. They hadn't done enough craziness. And he started just getting this feel for madness. And Dick Culpa, who's one of my heroes, he's the artist who created Batboy. We'll get to that in a minute. He said he came in to the shop one day with an ultrasound for his daughter, of his soon-to-be daughter, and held it up to the editor, to Kluntz, and said, this is a galaxy shaped like a human fetus. And that became a page one headline.
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember how ridiculous, because the National Enquirer, one of the things the National Enquirer kind of got known for is running with stories that didn't have like true confirmation. They got sued a lot of times by celebrities.
Oh yeah, quite a bit. They had a huge legal team, the Enquirer. And remember, this is the same company. So that's their legal team is the same one as the Weekly World News. Now, they had a whole clipping department, which started just collecting stories as much as they could. That was actually, they said 90% were stories they collected, and then they would just blow it up. They'd read about some lady who gave birth to a cow, and it was some just odd story, but they'd run it as though it was gospel. They did, they were like, we're not going to make up a story about a vampire, but if a guy calls us and says he's a vampire, we're taking him at his word.
Yeah. And I mean, that ended up being the formula for like Jerry Springer and stuff like that. Like,
exactly. In fact, one of the founders of Weekly World News was the producer of the Jerry Springer show.
Yeah.
So there you go. So if you watch that new documentary on Netflix, you'll get a little bit of Weekly World News thrown in there as well.
It's true. You find out how they got that formula. If somebody called them with some weird thing, that was it, right?
One of my favorite quotes was from one of the reporters. He's like, I remember doing a story about a guy who'd been on a diet and got so hungry that he spotted a little person on the street and thought he was a chicken. And he took off with a hatchet down the street after him. It's like, I had to have a psychiatrist come in and explain to me how this was possible, that someone could starve themselves so much that they became delusional. And we had to somehow explain that this was possible. And we put that in the story, and people just read the headline and didn't even look at the story. So, but he's like, but I actually worked on these stories. There was phone work. There was assignments for crime stories. We would call the police departments. And some things were bizarre enough in life that we just reported them straight.
I believe that. I believe it, because we always think like life, is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, he's like, I know it sounds stupid, but we actually did do research. We did talk to scientists, university professors, and most people were all too eager to tell you something was weird. And when they found out you were Weekly World News, they didn't stop. They were happy. So, and one of the other great quotes from the reporters there was, "Never talk yourself out of a good story. If a lady calls and says aliens ate her laundry, the New York Times would say, 'Do you have evidence?' We go, 'Oh, did they like the jeans or did they like the frilly stuff?'"
I love
that. Yeah, so they didn't get sued nearly as much as the National Enquirer because their quote, "We don't deal with celebrities that much, and space aliens generally don't sue us." So, but,
oh my God.
So Dick Culpa is this great artist, and they tell him, "We need a new space baby story." And that was they realized quickly they had several big headlines. One, Bigfoot. Anytime they put a Bigfoot headline, sales would increase quite a bit every time somebody spotted Bigfoot. And again, these were real sightings. They would be blown up a little bit for Weekly World News, but generally they were real sightings.
Yeah.
They wouldn't publish them all, again, because they didn't want to kill the lead. If you just keep pushing Bigfoot sighting, Bigfoot sighting, Bigfoot sighting, look at some of the Bigfoot shows, they disappear after a little while. It's the audience, the mainstream audience doesn't care. And that's what they realized very quickly is we've got to make sales. We got to pay the bills. Then they made Elvis is Alive.
Oh, yeah.
Was because some lady in England had a book where she said Elvis had faked his death and was living in the middle of nowhere. And then, of course, we had the Elvis tape, which is a famous book over here. And it came with a cassette tape that supposedly had Elvis's voice on it, where he announces he's alive and living in hiding. Sadly, we all know he died fighting a mummy in a Texas nursing home. That is,
oh my gosh, somehow I knew you were going to bring up Bubba Hotep. How do you do that? Like,
it's a documentary and it deserves watch on April 1st.
Not a documentary. Don't tell people
okay,
that.
It's a docudrama. They made it sensationalized.
Oh my God.
Entertain. But no, anyway, they realized Elvis stories were really selling and space babies were really selling. So they're like, draw me a space baby. And Dick Culpa starts looking at Spock. He starts looking at other things and he starts making it really big eyes and he gives it the big teeth and the Spock ears. And then the editor goes to him and says, we've done too many space babies in a row. Just we'll save that. So he put it back in his drawer. Didn't think about it. A few weeks later, we need a new space baby story. He'd pull it out again. They'd be like, no, that doesn't work. And finally somebody walked by and said, wow, that kind of looks like a bat and a human had a baby. And thus Bat Boy's headline became that week's issue with that famous, iconic image. And that became their second best-selling issue ever. Only other one was Elvis Lives, broke the 1.5 million. Bat Boy was like 1.2 million. That's how many people bought this.
Wow.
And so they realized they had another hit. But Elvis was a celebrity and could possibly, he had an estate that could cause them problems. But Bat Boy was their own creation completely. So they started drip feeding those stories. And just every once in a while they'd go, hey, we need another Bat Boy story. It's time for Bat Boy. And they would come up with another crazy story and they would kind of tie it to the news. They would do this and they would do their imaging to make it work and all that. I just love Bat Boy. As someone who was born in West Virginia and moved to Florida and then hearing about Bat Boy running away from West Virginia, trying to get to Florida. My friends used to, with my vampire history, my friends would always go, hey, Bat Boy's Mark's son, and he's trying to find him.
Well, what I think is really funny is that, people talk about Florida a lot of times with disdain, like it's a weirdo place. And it is, don't get me wrong. Florida man is legitimately a thing. But I think it's so funny that back then they were like, yeah, so he's trying to get to Florida.
Yep. And now Weekly World News was out of Lantana, Florida. So that'll tell you why they were getting so many great stories and all this. It's pretty amazing, the Bat Boy stuff. It got a comic, it got a wild documentary in 1996 called Bat Boy Discovered. And
wow.
Weekly World News went on and on and on, producing amazing episodes and amazing issues. Some of the fun ones, they were doing one big splashy headline, and they realized if it didn't grab them, they'd go to something else. And they had focus groups to come in, and they would go, okay, this week we sold X many with this cover. Let's show it to the focus group. And the focus group didn't care for it, and so they would try something else. And they would do sometimes 3 different covers, and it would send them out to the groups, and whichever one of the 3 groups voted the most was the one that they always went with. And they realized very quickly Roanoke, Virginia was the one that seemed to always win. The focus group that was out of Roanoke, Virginia. So I know our wonderful producer Bo is not too far from there. So she knows that area. And they realized quickly they had several things that were doing really good. One was predictions for the World War III. People were very concerned about what the future holds. So they realized prophecies were selling. They did one on the Unabomber's prophecy, the Donner Party prophecy. These are all episodes we've done and stuff. They also had many covers with miracle cures, garlic, apple cider vinegars, lots of alien abduction stories. And they said, we never abandon self-help stories. And it was so surprised because those also did well for them. They were like, we thought Bigfoot would always outsell everything. They had, anytime we could find stuff discovered on the Titanic, that would do well for them. And then of course, giant monsters. And then one of the reporters, a guy named Forsyth, he had one of the best quotes ever. He's like, I once did a story about gay skeletons found in a Titanic life ring, which is, what the hell is that? That makes no sense. But I wrote it, and people actually said it was quite touching that the sailors died in each other's arms.
Oh.
So he's like, there were things we couldn't do. So we couldn't do a lot of sex stuff because that would get us kicked out of the grocery stores. So they started developing again, because Bat Boy became so popular. That's when they stopped doing the let's get this. And that's when they start going, people are going, what are they going to come up with next week? So they would basically have to sell 4.5 million copies a week. So they would just start going into the conference room and they would just start making stuff. And what was it? Their producer, their director at the time, their chief editor, he said, you guys are too quiet. I want to feel like this editorial office is crazy. So please, please, please act like 5-year-olds. Let's make this as insane as we can. Let's just drive this crazy. And then they quickly realized they were dealing with 2 separate readers. They had the kids like us who were just loving how wild and weird this was. Yeah. But a little bit of us really wanted that to be true, right? Yeah. And then there was that group that just were in on the joke, right? This is goofy. I'm going to read it because this is hysterical. And so they did. They read it like crazy. There was, however, this third group that thought it was real. And
oh my God.
Real. And those were, they were walking that fine line of, some of our audience. We love you all, and we all love that you follow us. And like I said, we as Eerie Travelers, we love the strange stuff you guys send us on our listener tales. Do we vet them? No. We're reading them right as we got them. So yes, we're a little bit Weekly World News on those. Now, if I'm doing an episode on something like this, yes, I vet it. I research it. I do all the deep dives. Erica does deep dives. Bo does deep dives. We have a team. Carrie will do deep dives on this stuff too. And we get all the information and we make sure before we report it. Okay. Now our guests come on. we're interviewing guests. They could say things that we can't 100% verify. But are we going to take them at their word? 90% of the time we do. I think there's been one that we were like, but we're not going to mention any names. But that's what we do. We're investigating and researching, interviewing, and that's what the paranormal people have to do.
Yes.
The problem is you stumble on Weekly World News. You stumble on Creepypasta. You stumble on Wicked Crypty or Backpackerverse. That was the one that was the bane of my existence, writing Eerie, Florida and Freaky Florida, because people would send me, oh, Backpackerverse went to this haunted graveyard. And the first half would be pretty accurate, but then the second half would be some strange encounter that somebody just wrote. Oh. And what's funny is a couple of those were former Weekly World News writers. So nowadays, it'd probably be
TMZ,
AI writing or something. But now Weekly World News ended in 2018.
Oh,
that's
wow.
How long it lasted. And our 2007 was their last print issue. And in 2008 to 2018, it came back a little bit, but now it is a digital only.
Oh,
I love that the National Enquirer used to get credit for Elvis is Alive, but it was the Weekly World News that came out with that. And then they started getting real sightings. And at one point, between 1988 and 1992, they were running an Elvis story very often. And then again, our friend Dave Barry, who wasn't too far from them, he messaged them one day and just said, they should report that Elvis is dead again. And sure enough, the next newspaper from Weekly World News is Elvis is dead at 58.
I mean, that part's not funny. That's not what I'm laughing at. I'm just laughing at the fact that Dave Barry writes them and goes, this would be funny. And they're like, you know what? That would be funny. Write it.
And that's what happened. And the visuals for Bat Boy were just amazing. Dick Culpa created that out of nowhere. He said he was kind of influenced by The Scream, the famous painting. And when creating it, he's like, it was just something weird. They had to, we didn't talk about how he was conceived or anything because they couldn't put anything about like bestiality or anything like that in there.
No.
Then they were just basically saying he was from a different race that lived under the mountains, and they started developing the character, and kids loved it, right? Kids love monsters. I loved Bat Boy, and I wasn't a kid anymore, but I still thought he was awesome. And we were kind of teaching them, though, things like they said that they were teaching things like don't offer candy to Bat Boy because he'll bite your hand off. So they were trying to say, be careful with animals. He's not a hero. They were basically making him an anti-hero before he starts actually becoming a true hero after 9/11.
Yeah.
What was fun was the FBI gives them a call.
Oh.
And they said, hey, we're getting all these calls. Knock it off. Because you're saying we're hunting this Bat Boy. And we are not hunting Bat Boy. So Dick Culpa and Berger and Lynn, these are all writers for that and editors. They said, okay, we'll never do it again. And as soon as the receiver hit the hook, they said, okay, Bat Boy escapes from the FBI. We have to run that as our next headline. And then suddenly they were like, a few weeks later, we got another call from them. It wasn't anything to do with Bat Boy. It was, we had written a story about a Civil War orphan or child suddenly appearing on a battlefield like they'd stepped through a time warp. And I guess the FBI felt we'd given them some sort of villainous role by having them take the child into custody. They said we were giving them a bad name and saying they don't do this kind of thing. And they didn't realize that they were calling us, and we're basically in a nut house. It has nothing to do with reality. So,
oh my God.
Forward. I love the Weekly World News guys. They know to poke fun at herself. And they said, and then, people would call them with sightings and people call them with this. And they said, but the one thing they would say is, don't pitch us Bat Boy stories. We take care of Bat Boy ourselves.
Well, and that makes sense. And with sightings of Mothman or whatever winged creature people are seeing and whether or not it's a tulpa, that just gets into whether or not, enough people. I mean, what is that? 4 million people? That's a lot of people that could be putting that intention there about Bat Boy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge amount of people if you think about it.
Yeah. Now, Weekly World News did get into some trouble because in the late 80s, they had all these fictional headlines and all this. There was a movie that came out called True Stories, which is basically loosely portrayed on that. And then in 1989, they got 3 photos. And it was a just very rare departure into real life terror. And this also was one of their record selling copies, and it actually outpaced Elvis Is Alive. And that was the photos of Ted Bundy's body after he was executed.
Oh, wow.
Someone, insider, had taken photos, a cop or forensics or something, had taken photos and tried to sell them. And the National Enquirer got them, but couldn't run that in the Enquirer. By this time, like I said, the Enquirer's mainstream, but that didn't mean they couldn't run it in Weekly World News. So they ran it. And not only did they run it, they put the photos on the cover.
Wow.
Yeah. And people weren't sure if the photos were real or photoshopped because of all the strange covers and all that. And they did it, and they ran it, and that got them. It was a double page spread, ran on the cover. They split the edition. On the East Coast, they had a picture of Ted on the slab, and on the West Coast, they had human footprints found on the moon.
Wow.
Because they realized what was funny is after that, the sell-through rate of the issue on the West Coast that was the human footprints was selling bigger than Bundy. So,
that's interesting.
Yeah. So, but they did keep the Bundy pictures in that issue. They just weren't on the cover. So that's huge, right?
Yeah.
They were sold at one point, and it became America Media, and then USA Network did a TV series hosted by Edwin Newman, a famous, anchor, and you'll see clips of his stuff. And they just never found an audience, and it pretty much just kind of ended their time at Weekly World News around the early 2000s. So it just straggles along for those last years. And then things like The Onion start coming out online and things like that. So they had real competition, so the August 27 issue of 2007 was its last issue. And it was fake news, but it was harmless. They never.
And it was mostly fake news.
Yeah.
Because I will say, I think one of the things, and I forget who it is now, but somebody actually talked about looking into a lot of those stories. And there was, like you said before, there usually was a layer of truth with some of them, right? Mm. And not nearly as graphic sometimes, and sometimes less graphic than the story that actually, came from it. Because a lot of times too, what they would do is they get them from other countries, true newspaper headlines from other countries, and then they could run it and say, well, it was a story in that South Ecuadorian Times or whatever.
I think it was up till 2004 they never put a disclaimer anywhere on it, and in 2004 I think they put, make sure you suspend your disbelief while you're reading Weekly World News.
Yeah. And I think Weekly World News to me is a little bit of a guilty pleasure, meaning like it's one of those to me that, like, I don't know, watching it on TV versus reading it, you almost feel like you're doing something naughty when you buy it and read it and, all the ridiculous stuff. But that's
in our college. So in our college roommate's apartment, we had a casket that we had made, looked like an old tomb, toe pincher coffin, and we had a standee of Elvis in it. And every time there was an Elvis is alive or Elvis sighting copy of Weekly World News, we'd buy it and store it in that coffin. And it got to be up to about his waist. Wow. I'm sad that got destroyed in one of many moves. But I still have the standee.
Wow.
And Weekly World News is great. They had a couple characters that I loved that were their articles at the end, like the self-help articles that you would get. They had one guy who was like Ed Anger, and I think he was kind of like the right-wing, how to give you advice on how to raise your kids and all this. They had a Dear Dottie that was very much the, oh, my husband's cheating on me, what do I do? And that would become Jerry Springer show stuff later.
Yeah.
And they even had a couple psychics. Psychics were big and all that. It was fun reading. They had a really good crossword. I remember that.
Yeah.
Because it would have words like Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster and Constantinople, which, good luck with that one. So it was fun. And they made up the news before making up news was mainstream. So.
And they made it fun, because that's the big difference with the made up news these days. It's not much fun.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, I'm in my 50s. I still think back to those covers and just laugh.
Yeah.
And laugh. And one of my favorite quotes of all time was one of the reporters said, a lady once called us and said her toaster was talking to her. I said, put the toaster on the phone. And we took it seriously.
I love that so much. So thank you, Weekly World News, for bringing just a little bit more joy to some of us as we were growing up and being terrified that if we weren't careful, that boy could get us. Mark, take us away, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, patrons, as always, for putting up with us. Happy April Fools. I know this is airing a little while after, but we recorded it on a fun day. I think you'll all enjoy this. Just remember, as always, keep a skeptical mind. When you read something sensational, you need sensational evidence to prove it. And that's the Carl Sagan, extraordinary things require extraordinary evidence. And that's what we believe here at Eerie Travels. We do that on all of our books. We listen to the Cherokee tales. We listen to the historical tales. You look at them with a skeptical eye and you find the truth behind them. So, Bat Boy, I know you're listening. Father loves you very much. And I hope you'll come home soon after your run for the president in 2028. Just remember all of us who loved you from the beginning, who always will. And then remember, put the toaster on the phone, and we'll see you on the other side.